B Lieutenant Sarah Chun had never imagined her sniper training would be put to the ultimate test in the mountains of Afghanistan. The 28-year-old Marine Corps Scout sniper was supposed to be providing Overwatch support for a routine intelligence gathering mission. What started as a standard operation would become one of the most harrowing rescue missions in modern military history. The morning of October 15th, 2019, dawned clear and cold in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Sarah adjusted her scope as she watched through her binoculars from her elevated position on a rocky outcrop 800 meters away. Below, a six-man Navy SEAL team moved carefully through the narrow valley. Their mission simple: gather intelligence on suspected Taliban weapon caches and return to base before nightfall. Team leader Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez had briefed his team thoroughly. They expected light resistance at most. Intelligence reports suggested the area was only lightly guarded, with maybe 2 or 3 Taliban fighters keeping watch over the weapon storage. The team carried standard gear: assault rifles, communications equipment, and demolition charges to destroy any weapons they found. Sarah's job was to watch their backs. Positioned on high ground with her M40A6 sniper rifle, she had clear sight lines across most of the valley. Her spotter, Corporal Jake Wilson, scanned the surrounding ridges with powerful binoculars, looking for any signs of enemy movement. They had worked together for 8 months and trusted each other completely. The first 3 hours went exactly as planned. The SEAL team moved methodically through the rocky terrain, checking caves and abandoned buildings. Sarah watched them disappear into what looked like an old mining tunnel, their helmet cameras streaming live footage back to the command center 15 miles away. That's when everything went wrong. At 2:47 p.m., Sarah heard the distinctive crack of AK-47 rifle fire echoing through the valley. Not the sporadic shooting they expected, but sustained, coordinated gunfire from multiple positions. Her radio crackled to life with urgent transmissions from a SEAL team. Contact! Contact! We've got multiple shooters in the tunnel complex. Chief Rodriguez's voice was strained but controlled. This isn't just a weapons cache. It's a whole underground base. Sarah peered through her scope, trying to get eyes on the tunnel entrance. She could see muzzle flashes coming from hidden positions around the cave mouth. The intelligence had been completely wrong. Instead of a simple storage site, the SEAL team had stumbled into a major Taliban stronghold. "We're pinned down inside," came another voice over the radio. "At least 20 fighters, maybe more. They've got us surrounded in here." Sarah's heart raced as she realized the gravity of the situation. The tunnel complex was like a maze underground, and the SEAL team was trapped inside with limited ammunition and no easy way out. Even worse, Taliban reinforcements were already moving into position outside the caves. "Jake, give me range and wind readings," Sarah ordered her spotter. "I need to start thinning out those positions around the entrance." Through her scope, she could see at least 8 Taliban fighters taking cover behind rocks near the cave mouth. They were armed with assault rifles and rocket-propelled grenades, effectively sealing the SEAL team inside. More fighters were arriving every minute, some carrying heavy machine guns. Sarah's first shot took down a Taliban fighter who was setting up a machine gun position. The 7.62 millimeters bullet found its mark at 750 meters, and the man dropped instantly. But her shot also revealed her position to the enemy. Within seconds, bullets were whining off the rocks around her position. "We need to move," Jake urged. "They know where we are now." But Sarah had already identified her next target. Another Taliban fighter was attempting to position an RPG launcher to fire into the tunnel. If he succeeded, the confined space would amplify the explosion, potentially killing the entire SEAL team. Her second shot dropped the RPG gunner before he could fire. But now the Taliban forces were fully aware of the sniper threat. Some of them began moving towards Sarah's position, while others maintained the siege of the cave entrance. Inside the tunnel complex, Chief Rodriguez was trying to find an alternate exit while his team held off the Taliban fighters who had followed them underground. The narrow passages created a deadly maze where every corner could hide an enemy fighter. "Chun, we need you to keep those outside positions suppressed," Rodriguez radioed. "We found another way out, but it opens up 200 meters north of the main entrance. If they got that covered too, we're finished." Sarah swung her scope toward the coordinates Rodriguez had given her. Sure enough, she spotted 3 Taliban fighters moving to cover the alternate exit. They had anticipated the Americans might try to escape through the back way. But now Sarah faced an impossible choice. She could engage the fighters near the alternate exit, but that would mean leaving the main entrance unguarded. If she stayed focused on the main entrance, the SEAL team would run straight into a trap when they tried to escape. The radio crackled again with an update that made the situation even worse. "Be advised, we're tracking approximately 40 additional Taliban fighters moving toward your position from south. Estimated arrival in 20 minutes. 40 more fighters would turn this from a rescue mission into a massacre." The SEAL team needed to get out of those tunnels before the reinforcements arrived, but Sarah was just one person trying to cover multiple positions against overwhelming odds. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, painting the mountains in shades of orange and red, Sarah realized this was no longer about completing a mission. This was about survival. 6 elite Navy SEALs were trapped underground with enemies closing in from all directions, and she was their only lifeline. She took a deep breath, adjusted her scope, and prepared for the longest afternoon of her military career. The next few hours would test every skill she had learned, every shot she had practiced, and every ounce of courage she possessed. In the growing shadows of the Afghan mountains, one Marine sniper was about to face the fight of her life. Sarah's hands were steady despite the chaos erupting around her. Years of training had taught her to control her breathing and heart rate even under extreme pressure. But as she watched through her scope, she knew she was facing a situation no training exercise had ever prepared her for. The Taliban reinforcements were moving faster than expected. Through her binoculars, Jake counted at least 15 fighters already taking positions on the ridges above the tunnel entrance. They carried a mix of weapons: AK-47 rifles, PKM machine guns, and several RPG launchers. More concerning were the 2 men setting up what looked like a mortar position about 600 meters away. "Sarah, we've got mortars incoming," Jake warned. "They're going to start dropping rounds on the cave entrance. If those SEALs try to come out, they'll be sitting ducks." Inside the tunnel complex, Chief Rodriguez was leading his team through a maze of passages that seemed to stretch endlessly into the mountain. The Taliban fighters who had followed them inside were playing a deadly game of cat and mouse, using their knowledge of the tunnel system to stay ahead of the Americans. Petty Officer Second Class David Kim, the team's medic, was treating Petty Officer Marcus Johnson for a gunshot wound to the shoulder. The bullet had passed through clean, but Johnson was losing blood and would need proper medical attention soon. Every minute they stayed trapped increased the danger. "Chief, we found the alternate exit," called out Petty Officer James Murphy from the point position. "But there's at least 6 fighters outside. They've got the exit completely covered." Rodriguez crawled forward to look through a crack in the rocks that formed the rear exit. Murphy was right. The Taliban had positioned fighters with a clear view of the opening. Anyone trying to exit would be cut down immediately. They were truly trapped. Sarah made her decision. She would have to eliminate the fighters covering the rear exit first, then quickly shift to suppress the main entrance while the team escaped. It would require precision shooting at extreme range under combat conditions. Miss even one shot, and the SEAL team would be walking into a death trap. Her first target was a Taliban machine gunner positioned behind a large boulder 850 meters away. The man had a clear field of fire across the rear exit and was the most immediate threat. Sarah calculated the range, wind speed, and elevation difference. At this distance, even a small error would mean a complete miss. She controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger. The bullet traveled for almost a full second before finding its target. The machine gunner dropped behind his position. 1 down, 5 to go. But her muzzle flash had given away her exact position. Immediately, rifle fire began snapping past her location. Jake grabbed her shoulder and pointed to the left. "We've got 8 fighters moving up the slope toward us." They'll be in grenade range in 5 minutes. Sarah ignored the incoming fire and acquired her next target. A Taliban fighter with an RPG was taking aim at the rear exit where the SEALs would emerge. This shot was even more critical. If the RPG gunner lived, he could kill multiple team members with one shot. The range was 780 meters, but the target was partially concealed behind rocks. Sarah could only see the man's head and shoulders. It was an incredibly difficult shot under perfect conditions, nearly impossible with bullets flying around her position. She steadied her rifle against a rock and found the target in her scope. The fighter was adjusting his RPG, preparing to fire at any movement from the cave. Sarah held her breath and fired. The bullet struck the RPG gunner's center mass, and he collapsed. But as he fell, his finger pulled the trigger on the RPG launcher. The rocket-propelled grenade fired wild, exploding against the cliff face above the rear exit. Rock fragments rained down, partially collapsing the opening. "The exit is blocked," came Chief Rodriguez's voice over the radio. "Repeat, the rear exit is blocked. We need another way out." Sarah's heart sank. Her successful shot had inadvertently sealed the SEAL team's escape route. Now they were trapped with no alternate exit and Taliban fighters closing in from inside and outside the tunnels. Jake was scanning with his binoculars when he spotted movement that changed everything. "Sarah, look at grid 472. There's a hidden entrance about 400 meters west of the main cave." Sarah swung her scope to the coordinates Jake had given her. Hidden behind a cluster of boulders was what appeared to be another opening into the tunnel system. Even better, it looked like the Taliban hadn't discovered it yet. Only 2 fighters were in the general area, and they seemed to be focused on the main cave entrance. "Chief, we found you another way out," Sarah radioed. "West side, 400 meters from your current position. But you'll have to navigate through the tunnel system to reach it." Inside the caves, Rodriguez was studying a hand-drawn map they had found on one of the Taliban fighters they had eliminated. The tunnel system was larger and more complex than anyone had imagined. It looked like the caves connected in multiple directions with several chambers that had been converted into ammunition storage and living quarters. "Sarah, according to this map, we can reach that western exit, but we'll have to go deeper into the mountain first," Rodriguez reported. "It'll take us at least 30 minutes to navigate through there. Can you keep those positions suppressed that long?" Sarah looked at her ammunition count. She had started the day with 40 rounds of match-grade 7.62 millimeters ammunition. After her initial shots, she was down to 34 rounds. The Taliban forces were still growing in number, and she was beginning to take sustained fire from multiple positions. The mortar team had finished setting up their weapon and were preparing to fire their first round. Sarah knew that once they started dropping mortars on the area, the SEALs would be trapped forever. The explosions would collapse tunnel entrances and make any escape impossible. "Jake, I need range and wind on that mortar position," she ordered. 920 meters, wind from the east at 8 miles per hour. Jake replied immediately. It was an extremely long shot for combat conditions. Sarah had made longer shots on the practice range, but never with enemy fighters shooting at her, and never with so much at stake. At over 900 meters, the bullet would take more than a second to reach its target. If the mortar crew moved at the wrong moment, she would miss completely. She acquired the target through her scope. 2 Taliban fighters were preparing to drop the first mortar round into the tube. Once that round fired, they would have a range to the cave entrances and could systematically destroy every possible exit. Sarah controlled her breathing and found her natural point of aim. The crosshairs settled on the fighter holding the mortar round. At this range, the bullet would drop significantly, so she aimed high to compensate. Wind would push the bullet slightly to the left, so she adjusted for that as well. The shot had to be perfect. She squeezed the trigger and watched through her scope as the bullet traveled downrange. The Taliban fighter holding the mortar round suddenly jerked and fell backward. The mortar round dropped and rolled away from the tube. The other fighter dove for cover, leaving the mortar position temporarily abandoned. But Sarah's success was short-lived. The Taliban commander had recognized the threat she posed and was coordinating an assault on her position. At least 12 fighters were moving up the slope toward her location, using cover and concealment to get within assault range. "Sarah, we need to move now," Jake urged. "They'll be on top of us in 2 minutes." But moving would mean abandoning her overwatch position. From any other location, she wouldn't have clear sight lines to protect the SEAL team during their escape. If she moved, Chief Rodriguez and his team would be on their own against overwhelming odds. Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of the mission. She wasn't going anywhere. One Marine sniper was going to hold her position against a company-sized Taliban force, buying time for 6 Navy SEALs to escape through hostile territory. The sun was setting behind the mountains, and darkness would soon provide additional cover for both sides. In the growing shadows, Sarah prepared for the most intense firefight of her military career. The first Taliban fighter appeared only 50 meters away from Sarah's position, moving carefully from rock to rock up the steep slope. She could hear others moving through the darkness, their equipment rattling softly as they climbed. Jake had already repositioned to cover their left flank, his M4 rifle ready for close combat. Ça fait dans impossible tactical situation. She needed to keep providing sniper support for the SEAL team's escape, while simultaneously defending her own position against a direct assault. Switching between her precision rifle for long-range shots and her sidearm for close defense would cost precious seconds that could mean the difference between success and disaster. Inside the tunnel complex, Chief Rodriguez was leading his team through passages that grew narrower with each turn. The hand-drawn map they had captured was proving accurate, but the route to the western exit was treacherous. Several passages were partially collapsed, forcing them to crawl through spaces barely wide enough for a man with full gear. Petty Officer Johnson was struggling with his shoulder wound, but he refused to slow down the team. Every few minutes, they could hear Taliban fighters moving through other parts of the tunnel system, sometimes only meters away through thin rock walls. The enemy was systematically searching every passage, and it was only a matter of time before they found the Americans. "Chief, we're at checkpoint 3 on the map," whispered Petty Officer Murphy from the front of the formation. "According to this, we should reach the western exit in about 15 more minutes." Rodriguez checked his watch. They had been underground for over 2 hours, and darkness was falling outside. The cover of night might help their escape, but it would also make Sarah's job much more difficult. Providing sniper support in darkness required night vision equipment and perfect knowledge of friendly positions. Sarah was facing her own challenges topside. The Taliban assault team was moving with practice coordination, using fire and maneuver tactics to advance up the slope. 3 fighters would provide covering fire, while 2 others moved forward. Then they would leapfrog positions and repeat the process. She had already eliminated 2 of the advancing fighters with precise shots, but the others had learned to stay hidden behind cover. They were patient, professional, and determined to eliminate the sniper threat that was disrupting their entire operation. Jake's voice was urgent in her ear. "Sarah, I got movement on the right side, too. At least 6 more coming up that way. We're about to be surrounded." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Sarah estimated that over 20 Taliban fighters were now focused solely on eliminating her position. Even if she could hold them off, she was running low on ammunition. After her recent shots, she was down to 28 rounds of sniper ammunition and 3 magazines for her sidearm. Through her scope, she could see the mortar position was active again. The crew had returned to their weapon and were preparing to fire. If they succeeded in dropping mortars on the cave entrances, it would trap the SEAL team permanently underground. Sarah had to make a choice: engage the immediate threat of the assault teams moving toward her position, or take out the mortar crew before they could fire. Either choice left her vulnerable to the other threat. She chose to prioritize the mortar position. The assault teams were dangerous to her personally, but the mortars could kill the entire SEAL team. Sarah acquired the target through her scope and fired. At 920 meters in fading light, the shot was at the absolute limit of her capabilities. The bullet found its mark, striking the mortar tube itself rather than the crew. The impact damaged the tube enough to make it inoperable, but the crew survived and scattered to covered positions. It wasn't a perfect result, but it eliminated the immediate mortar threat. Her muzzle flash had revealed her exact position to the advancing assault teams. Immediately, concentrated rifle fire erupted from at least 8 positions around her location. Bullets ricocheted off rocks and whined overhead as Jake returned fire with his assault rifle. Contact, right. 3 fighters, 200 meters. Jake called out as he engaged targets with rapid, accurate fire. Sarah was forced to abandon her sniper rifle temporarily and draw her M9 pistol. 2 Taliban fighters had advanced to within 30 meters of her position and were preparing to assault her location with grenades. At this range, her sniper rifle was too unwieldy for effective defense. The first fighter appeared around a large boulder, his AK-47 sweeping towards Sarah's position. She put 2 rounds center mass, and he dropped immediately. The second fighter was more cautious, using a rock outcropping for cover as he tried to get an angle on her position. Sarah used a tactical movement to reposition behind better cover, but the action cost her visual contact with the tunnel complex below. For 30 critical seconds, she couldn't provide overwatch support for the SEAL team's escape. During those 30 seconds, everything changed underground. Chief Rodriguez had reached what should have been the western exit according to the captured map. Instead, they found a dead end. The passage had been sealed with rocks and debris, probably months or years ago. The map was either outdated or deliberately misleading. Dead end, Rodriguez reported over the radio. The western exit is blocked. We need another option. Sarah's heart sank as she heard the transmission. While she had been fighting for her life topside, the SEAL team had spent precious time and energy navigating to an exit that didn't exist. They were now deeper in the tunnel system than when they started, with Taliban fighters searching for them throughout the complex. Jake had moved to a new position and was scanning the valley with his night vision equipment. Sarah, I'm seeing heat signatures moving toward the main cave entrance. Looks like they're bringing up heavy weapons. Through her scope, Sarah could see what Jake was referring to. Several Taliban fighters were carrying what appeared to be a recoilless rifle toward the main cave entrance. The weapon was designed to destroy fortified positions and vehicles. If they positioned it correctly, they could fire directly into the tunnels and eliminate anything inside. The recoilless rifle changed the entire tactical situation. Unlike mortars, which fire in a high arc, the recoilless rifle would fire directly into the tunnel system. The explosion and fragmentation would be channeled through the narrow passages, making escape impossible for anyone underground. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio with a new plan. Sarah, we found another passage that might lead to a different exit. But, according to this map, it comes out right next to the main entrance. We need you to suppress that area completely when we make our move. Sarah looked at her ammunition count again. 25 rounds remaining. The Taliban forces were still advancing on her position from multiple directions. The recoilless rifle team was setting up their weapon 600 meters away. And now she needed to provide covering fire for the SEAL team's escape right into the most heavily defended area. The mathematical reality was simple. She didn't have enough ammunition to eliminate all the threats. She would have to choose her targets carefully and hope that superior marksmanship could overcome overwhelming numbers. As full darkness settled over the Afghan mountains, Sarah prepared for the most critical shooting of her career. 6 lives depended on her ability to deliver precise fire under impossible conditions. The enemy had numbers and position, but she had skill, determination, and the unwavering commitment to never leave a fellow warrior behind. The final phase of the battle was about to begin. Sarah's night vision scope transformed the dark valley into a green-tinted landscape of shadows and heat signatures. The Taliban fighters stood out clearly against the cool mountain rocks, their body heat creating distinct targets for her precision fire. But the same technology that helped her see them also revealed just how outnumbered she truly was. Jake's whispered count confirmed her worst fears. 37 enemy fighters visible from this position, more moving in from the south ridge. Sarah, this isn't sustainable. The recoilless rifle crew had finished positioning their weapon and were preparing to fire the first round into the main cave entrance. Sarah knew she had perhaps 60 seconds before they would destroy any chance of the SEAL team's survival. The weapon's 75mm round would turn the confined tunnel space into a killing zone. She acquired the recoilless rifle position through her scope. The crew consisted of 3 men, a gunner, a loader, and a commander directing the targeting. At 580 meters in complete darkness, she would need to eliminate the entire crew quickly and accurately to prevent them from firing. Her first shot took out the gunner as he was adjusting the weapon's elevation. The 7.62mm bullet struck him in the upper chest, and he collapsed across the rifle's sight mechanism. The loader immediately moved to take over the gunner's position. Sarah's second shot dropped the loader before he could fully man the weapon. But the third crew member, the commander, was already calling for replacement personnel. Within minutes, a new crew would arrive to operate the recoilless rifle. 23 rounds remaining. Inside the tunnel complex, Chief Rodriguez was leading his team through what might be their final approach to freedom. The new passage they had found was even more treacherous than the previous route. Parts of it required them to belly crawl through spaces so narrow they had to push their weapons ahead of them. Petty Officer Johnson's shoulder wound was getting worse. The blood loss and physical exertion were taking their toll, but he refused to complain or slow the team's progress. Medic David Kim periodically checked Johnson's condition and whispered updates to Rodriguez. "Chief, Johnson needs medical attention soon. He's lost a lot of blood, and his core temperature is dropping." Rodriguez knew they were racing against time on multiple fronts. Johnson needed immediate medical care. Their ammunition was running low, and Sarah's position was becoming increasingly untenable. Every minute they remained underground increased the danger for everyone involved. "Murphy, how much farther to this exit?" Rodriguez whispered to his point man. "According to the map, maybe 50 meters, but this passage splits into 3 directions up ahead. No indication which way to go." The tunnel split created another deadly decision point. Choose wrong, and they could wander lost in the mountain while Sarah fought a hopeless battle above. Choose right, and they might emerge into a Taliban ambush. With no reliable intelligence about the tunnel layout, they were essentially guessing with their lives. Above ground, Sarah was facing her own impossible choices. The Taliban assault teams had advanced to within 20 meters of her position on 2 sides. She could hear them communicating in hushed voices, coordinating their final assault. Once they got close enough to use grenades, her defensive position would become untenable. But abandoning her position meant abandoning the SEAL team. From any other location on the mountain, she wouldn't have the sight lines necessary to provide effective covering fire during their escape. The geometry of the terrain locked her into this single position. Jake had identified the most immediate threat. "Sarah, 4 fighters with grenades at 2 o'clock, 15 meters. They're preparing to assault our position." Sarah made a tactical decision that went against every principle of sniper employment. Instead of engaging distant targets with precision fire, she would use her sniper rifle for close-range combat. The powerful 7.62mm rounds would be devastating at short range, but it meant accepting close combat on the enemy's terms. She repositioned to engage the Grenade assault team, but as she moved, her radio crackled with an urgent transmission from Chief Rodriguez. "Sarah, we found the exit. It opens up about 100 meters north of the main cave entrance. We can see outside, but there are at least 8 Taliban fighters directly in front of the opening. We need immediate suppression fire to make our break." The timing couldn't have been worse. Sarah was seconds away from contact with the Taliban assault teams attacking her position, and now she needed to provide covering fire for the SEAL team's escape 600 meters away. She couldn't engage both threats effectively. "Jake, take the assault teams. I'm shifting to cover the SEAL extraction." It was a desperate gamble. Jake was an excellent soldier, but he wasn't equipped for a close-range firefight against 4 Taliban fighters with grenades. Sarah was essentially asking him to hold an impossible position while she engaged targets at extreme range. Sarah swung her rifle toward the coordinates Rodriguez had provided. Through her night vision scope, she could see the hidden exit among a cluster of rocks. 8 Taliban fighters had taken positions covering the opening, creating an interlocking field of fire that would cut down anyone attempting to escape. Her first shot eliminated a machine gunner position behind a boulder directly in front of the exit. The fighter's death would create a gap in their defensive coverage, giving the SEALs a narrow window of opportunity. Behind her, Jake opened fire on the Taliban assault team with his M4 rifle. The sound of automatic gunfire was deafening in the mountain silence. Jake's position erupted with muzzle flashes as he engaged multiple targets simultaneously. Sarah forced herself to focus on the SEAL extraction site, despite the close combat raging behind her. Her second shot took out another Taliban fighter who was positioning an RPG to fire at the cave entrance. Each shot was critical. Any surviving enemy fighter could kill multiple SEAL team members during their escape. Sarah, grenade! Jake's warning came just as a Taliban hand grenade exploded 10 meters from their position. The blast showered them with rock fragments and temporarily disrupted Sarah's aim. When her vision cleared, she saw that Jake had been hit by shrapnel, but was still fighting. Blood was running down his face from multiple small cuts, but he continued engaging the assault team. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio with the most critical transmission of the night. Sarah, we're making our move now. 30 seconds to the exit. Sarah had 30 seconds to eliminate the remaining Taliban fighters covering the escape route. 6 shots maximum, 6 different targets, all while under direct attack at her own position. It was an impossible standard of marksmanship under combat conditions that no training exercise had ever replicated. She acquired her next target and fired. A Taliban fighter with an assault rifle dropped immediately. 4 rounds remaining for 5 targets. The mathematics of survival were working against everyone. 20 meters behind her, Jake was down to his last magazine as he fought off the Taliban assault team. 2 enemy fighters were dead, but 2 others were still advancing with grenades. Jake's rifle jammed at the worst possible moment, leaving him with only his sidearm against superior numbers. Sarah had to make the hardest decision of her military career. Continue providing covering fire for the SEAL team's escape, or turn to help Jake in his desperate fight for survival. She couldn't save both her spotter and the 6-man SEAL team with the ammunition she had remaining. In the darkness of the Afghan mountains, a single Marine sniper was about to discover what it truly means to leave no one behind. Time seemed to slow as Sarah faced the impossible choice between saving Jake and covering the SEAL team's escape. In that split second of hesitation, she remembered something her instructor had told her during sniper school. Sometimes the best solution isn't choosing between 2 bad options. Sometimes it's finding a third option nobody else can see. Sarah made a decision that defied tactical logic. Instead of choosing between the 2 crises, she would address both simultaneously using a technique she had never attempted under combat conditions. She would engage multiple targets in rapid succession, switching between her primary rifle and sidearm to cover both positions. Jake, when I start shooting, move left and get behind that large rock, she shouted over the gunfire. Her first shot eliminated another Taliban fighter covering the SEAL escape route. Without hesitation, she spun around and put 2 pistol rounds into one of the fighters assaulting Jake's position. The man dropped just as he was pulling the pin on a grenade. Sarah spun back to her primary scope and acquired another target near the cave exit. Her rifle shot dropped a Taliban fighter who was preparing to fire an RPG at the emerging SEAL team. Then, she immediately turned back to help Jake, who had cleared his rifle jam and was engaging the last Taliban fighter in close combat. The technique was working, but it was burning through her remaining ammunition at an unsustainable rate. 17 rounds left in her sniper rifle, 1 magazine remaining for her pistol. Meanwhile, additional Taliban fighters were moving to reinforce both positions. Chief Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. We're at the exit. "Sarah, we need 10 seconds of covering fire." Through her scope, Sarah could see the first SEAL emerging from the hidden cave entrance. Chief Rodriguez appeared first, scanning for threats before signaling the rest of his team. The wounded Petty Officer Johnson came next, supported by the team medic David Kim. But Sarah also spotted what the SEALs couldn't see from their low angle. 3 Taliban fighters had positioned themselves on high ground, overlooking the escape route. They were waiting for the entire team to emerge before opening fire, planning to eliminate all 6 Americans with a coordinated ambush. Sarah had perhaps 5 seconds to eliminate 3 targets before they could massacre the SEAL team. At ranges between 400 and 650 meters, firing from an unstable position while under direct attack, it represented the most challenging shooting sequence of her career. Her first shot struck the farthest Taliban fighter at 650 meters. The man tumbled from his concealed position among the rocks. Her second shot dropped another fighter at 520 meters who was aiming an assault rifle at the emerging SEALs. The third Taliban fighter realized his position was compromised and fired prematurely. His burst of automatic fire went wide, missing the SEAL team, but revealing his exact location to Sarah. Her return shot was instant and precise, eliminating the final threat to the escape route. "Go! Go! Go!" Sarah transmitted as the last 3 SEALs emerged from the cave. But their escape route led directly through a gauntlet of Taliban positions. Even with the immediate threats eliminated, the team faced a 200-meter sprint across open ground while enemy fighters repositioned to engage them. Sarah shifted into what snipers call rapid precision fire mode. Rather than taking carefully aimed shots, she began engaging targets as quickly as she could acquire them. It was a technique that sacrificed some accuracy for volume of fire, but it was the only way to suppress multiple enemy positions simultaneously. Her shots came in rapid succession, one Taliban fighter diving for cover behind a rock, another attempting to set up a machine gun position, a third trying to flank the SEAL team's escape route. Each shot forced the enemy to keep their heads down rather than engaging the escaping Americans. Jake had finished eliminating the Taliban assault team at their position and immediately began providing supporting fire with his M4 rifle. Despite his shrapnel wounds, he was engaging targets with calm precision, adding his firepower to Sarah's covering fire. The SEAL team moved with the fluid coordination that comes from years of training together. Even wounded, Petty Officer Johnson maintained tactical spacing and returned fire when possible. The team's movement was a textbook example of moving under fire, but Sarah knew they were still exposed for at least another minute. That's when she spotted the final threat that could destroy everything they had accomplished. A Taliban fighter with a rocket-propelled grenade had positioned himself 800 meters away, well outside the range of the SEALs' personal weapons, but with a clear shot at their escape route. The RPG would detonate among the fleeing Americans, likely killing or wounding the entire team. Sarah had one shot to stop him. At 800 meters, firing rapidly without time for careful calculation, it was the most difficult shot she had ever attempted. Miss, and 6 Navy SEALs would die. Her rifle had 12 rounds remaining. She forced herself to slow down despite the urgency of the situation. This shot required the precision marksmanship that had made her one of the Marine Corps' finest snipers. Sarah controlled her breathing, found her natural point of aim, and squeezed the trigger with the same smooth pressure she had practiced thousands of times. The bullet traveled for nearly a full second before striking the RPG gunner center mass. The man collapsed backward, his unfired rocket launcher clattering against the rocks. The final threat to the SEAL team's escape had been eliminated. "We're clear. All personnel accounted for." Chief Rodriguez's voice over the radio was the most beautiful sound Sarah had ever heard. But their ordeal wasn't over yet. Taliban reinforcements were still moving toward the area, and the Americans needed to reach their extraction point 3 kilometers away. Sarah and Jake would have to abandon their position and join the SEAL team for the dangerous journey back to friendly lines. As they prepared to move, Sarah looked back at the valley where the firefight had taken place. The battle had lasted less than 4 hours, but it felt like a lifetime. 7 Americans had entered a Taliban stronghold expecting light resistance. Through skill, courage, and an unwavering commitment to leaving no one behind, all 7 were leaving alive. Jake gathered their equipment, while Sarah took one final look through her scope. The Taliban forces were regrouping and would soon resume their pursuit. The Americans had perhaps a 15-minute head start before enemy fighters would begin tracking them through the mountains. The extraction point was 3 kilometers away across difficult terrain, with wounded personnel and limited ammunition. They would have to move fast and quiet, avoiding Taliban patrols while navigating treacherous mountain paths in complete darkness. But as Sarah shouldered her rifle and prepared to move out, she felt a quiet satisfaction that went beyond personal survival. Every shot she had fired that night had protected American lives. Every tactical decision had prioritized the mission and her fellow warriors over her own safety. Chief Rodriguez approached her position as they prepared to move. "Chun, I don't know how you did what you did tonight. That was some of the finest shooting I've ever witnessed under combat conditions." Sarah nodded acknowledgement, but didn't respond. She was already focusing on the next challenge, getting everyone home alive. The firefight was over, but the mission wouldn't be complete until every American reached safety. 3 hours later, 2 Marine helicopters touched down at the extraction point to pick up 7 warriors who had learned that sometimes the impossible is just another word for Tuesday. Sarah's ammunition count when she finally cleared her weapon, 3 rounds remaining. In the debriefing that followed, military analysts would study Sarah's shooting performance as an example of precision marksmanship under extreme conditions. Her successful engagement of 23 enemy targets at ranges from 30 to 920 meters, while under direct attack, and with limited ammunition, became a case study in sniper tactics. But for Sarah, the mission would always be remembered simply as the night when 7 Americans looked out for each other in the darkness, and all 7 came home.